So in this video I want to do a very particular type of topological study. So we'll start off by deleting the cube, and we'll just make a plane, and I'm just going to put a loop cut in here, and we'll just pull that back, and we'll put a loop cut here, pull this one forward, pull this one back, just kind of create a strange bar graph, you know. So we got our blind pattern. And I'm going to select everything and use select boundary loop in order to mark this and put a couple of levels of sub D on it, and we can just come in and start hard creasing some and just playing with our levels of sub D. In fact, we can look at the wireframe, which it won't show the true wireframe unless we go into Control tilde helper and turn on optimal display, and then we can actually see it, or in your modifier panel, whichever you prefer. And so we're just kind of looking at the geometry we're being given here, and I think something like that will suffice for the purposes of this example. And so I'll bring in a cylinder, and instead of taking 32 rounds to the head, we're going to lower that down to something more manageable, like let's say 16. So, you know, when it comes to cylinders, the amount that you're cutting in is also the amount that you have to deal with. And this is something that I was hoping to really emphasize through these particular videos, is that, you know, some of the choices that you make do become choices you have to battle against later on. So I'll duplicate this off on the side just in case I need it in the future. And I can already tell you that viewport shadows are going to mess with me. So I'll press Alt V and just turn that off. And more than likely this boolean isn't going to work, but let's try our luck. Q union. Oh, and it did work. Good for us. We'll press 1, go back to our first collection, and just visual geometry to mesh, and we'll just delete this face on the back by vertice, which will remove everything that was connected with it. So now we have this really interesting game of angles. We have a very straight, curve, round, and then we have a double round situation going on. So I can tell you already, my first mistake was I didn't give this enough buffer room at the top nor at the bottom. So I'm already off to a bad start. So I'm going to press E, S, Z, just scale those up. We'll just grab these and just uncrease them. Actually, let's just Control Shift click sharpen to recalculate our creasing. We don't want this area crease, nor this one or this one. I could have messed with the angle of sharpen, but I opt to just leave those settings at their default at all times for some reason, and just change things manually. So let's talk about cleaning this up. So this situation is actually one that's even daunting to someone like me, because we definitely want to keep everything that we have going on, but we want to try to give some sort of topological piece to the mesh that we have at hand, and we really can't force a lot of buffers in on this piece because the cylinder is just so short. So this is truly a topological conundrum, but once you begin kind of sectioning these areas out into what we want them to be, it becomes a lot more straightforward. So let's go ahead and begin with that. So we'll just begin with our old trusty knife, which knife is great. It's just sometimes you'll be knifing for a good moment and you will no longer get snaps, in which case you should probably just drop knife because you're creating a double situation in there. So it's just one of the weird isms about knife, is that it will just kind of stop on you as you're working, but no problem. We are also generating a lot of geometry as we're working. In fact, we can see that now it's ended on its ability to snap, meaning it's time to drop it and start again. So, you know, with most of these examples, you might notice that the first thing I always opt for is to begin quarantining the area and just kind of setting up my own plot to be written here. And we got to just cease, and we're just continuing around. And I was actually messing with this one last night and was like, you know, this one is actually pretty painful. I should do a video on it. So here we are in today's video, looking at this piece, wondering how on earth is that going to work out. So for the most part, we already have a pretty good quarantine area happening around our geometry itself. So just a little bit of merging to last with this area. And like I said, this is something kind kind of do for fun. It's like my Tetris with geometry. So if there was a video game for 3D, it would be helping the points make their decisions, because apparently these decisions can be quite difficult on geometry. So for this area, I was thinking about how to solve it and still have both flows going, which is something that I'm going to want. And also I don't want to sacrifice too much of the perimeter. In fact, adding this triangle is going to come back to bite me later. So that sort of thing must be added. With any video about topology, it's going to always bring people out of the woodworks who are definitely knowledgeable on topology. There's just no escaping it. So, read their comments and take them into your heart, and, let them enhance you, because there's always someone out there who knows even more about topology than the person talking about topology in this video. So just keep that in mind. So we'll continue on just cutting, and we're just working our flow around, except this area is not going to be able to have much of a flow made around it unless we begin jumping the track and making a new path. Even if just for a moment we create that path, it gives us a kind of railway we can continue. So notice that in most of these studies, I'm always using the G key. In fact, for the people out there who are fans of auto merge, I'll turn it on at this time. But like always, in fact, I hate how I can't see the geometry at this particular angle. In fact, we'll full screen it so we can really just get in here and focus. And we'll just J lightning bolt, and we're just looking at this geometry, just attempting to solve it. In this area, I'll need to return back to, but it's a pretty advanced corner there, so I didn't want to deal with it immediately. For this, we want to continue our perimeter protection loop that's going to be protecting this area. So hopefully over the course of these videos, I've emphasized the importance of heading geometry off, of having things in place in order to hold things. As I study it more and more, even personally in my practices, I'm like realizing that, maybe topology isn't the most absolute difficult thing to explain. A popular question is, why don't you just model it with all quads? But, with some shapes, there's no other way to really set it up. So Booleans definitely open the door as far as that goes for creation, that you can create shapes using Booleans and then deal with them later. And they're shapes that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to create in traditional 3D modeling using regular techniques, or at least that's how I interpret it. So we'll keep looking at this area, and I really want to maintain this angle, but I need to create some additional geometry. So I'm just really dancing around and looking at things, trying to figure out what can go where, and if it should, or if I should just try to start quadding things out and just start solving things on this side. And we can just slide things around. GG, probably the best hotkey ever in Blender. I mean, there's a lot of good hotkeys, but I think GG was suggested by Jonathan Williamson, but it is one of my favorites. Like, ever since it was added, it just made topology management a lot more manageable in Blender. But to whoever added it, it is one of the best. So we have this double loop kind of going, which is not bad. We have a kind of an adjacent flow to the flow we're maintaining that we could also maintain in addition and start really working this shape around. However, we got to be careful to not sacrifice any part of the form. The goal is to do this without any shrink wrapping this time. So we could see that sliding that vert would be detrimental. So that's where we would kind of create a little microverse around this and start really analyzing what we want to do here. Do we want to slide that there, which will sacrifice just a little bit of the surface? Do we want to ignore it because we're never going to add another loop inside of here, meaning we can just terminate it here, even though, at the end I'm going to probably choose subdivision as my mesh auditor to just kind of show how well I did. And right here I actually made a mistake. So how to go about correcting it. We can knife from this area and create an opportunity for additional geometry in the process by creating a quad flow where there previously was none. We got to avoid sliding that one. That one is central to the shape. It's like a central pillar. So this little mess, we're just gonna send these to their respective galaxies and just begin cleaning this up. And we'll do the same thing with this area, just slide things around, grab our knife, and now we have basically the results that we want. So now for this area, you know, how do we want to deal with this? Do we want to create a forest loop? If we create any additional geometry that goes in these areas, it's going to result in some truly painful results later. So the goal is to keep everything that's in this cylinder the exact same round. So we started off with 16, and if we look at this, we were still at 16. So we don't want to break that rule at all. So that's also going to be a thing that weighs on my decisions. And so as a result, we will slide this down, geometric convergence, thus simplifying, creating our loop. The goal is definitely to, this shading is just atrocious. There's got to be a better way. You know what? None of these are good. Jeez. Just dusky night, I guess. There we go. So we're still getting in here, and you see the shading just kind of starts working against you at some point. So let's just prepare for that. I might try to make a quick button to toggle that sort of thing to make life easier for you guys. You know, that's how most tools come about. It's like, hey, this thing is a bit of a nuisance. Let's try to make it less of a nuisance. So for this area, we want to remove it, but we don't want to sacrifice too much of the perimeter. So I'm going to dissolve it, which shows us just kind of a potential of what this would look like without such a piece existing. Which piece do we want to dissolve? Maybe that one. And we can just slide this one down, slide this one down, and this piece we'll send to the next adjacent galaxy, letting this be just a terminator for this area. So a lot of hard decisions have to be made when it comes to topology and dealing with these sort of things. And you know, I was hoping to really get that across is you know, the goal of this topology game is to solve it without disrupting so much of the surrounding geometry. So I mean, in the previous video when I was talking about shrink wrap, it wasn't to propose it as a solution that, you know, even though it exists as one, it was to show that, you know, there are good and bad ways to use shrink wrap, and, you know, to propose a better way to use shrink wrap. So we look at this and we see that this one could best be solved like so. Maybe solving it like so would be better. Also, the lighting is just working against us again. We should be able to just drag that sphere. We'll just rotate our light around. And once we get to this part, it starts to get really crazy. So let's bring along our loop that we've just been kind of shepherding along. This loop will be security for our other loop. You know, our loop doesn't need so much security, but it's for the better. We see in this area that we probably are going to need to make some hard decisions. So I don't want to get rid of the loop at the bottom. In fact, we want to maintain that. But when you look at something like this, it can definitely get visually confusing. So I just want y'all to know I set up this situation to be kind of harder than usual on purpose, just to show kind of the more extreme topological battles one can find himself in when they're trying to solve these things, you know, and the amount of angles that they will have to keep. And for this area, really looking at this, just thinking how we could go about it, I'm thinking we can create a loop across and then create like an inner system here that will allow us to maintain that connection. And we'll probably need to use the same trick as we work our way around this. In fact, we have our two loops, our heroic loops that we're just shepherding along, just trying to create the flow. And that is possibly sufficient, but actually we have to solve this completely different, or else we break the rule of having an additional point appear on the end. And as I look around this mesh, it just gets crazy. I mean, we're actually working inside of this area. So it's like, how do we get this to hold? We probably do not. Actually, there's always a way. So we haven't yet put a perimeter border protection loop on this thing. So I will press Control B to bevel, and we'll give it one loop and then set our boundary. And now we have a boundary loop that's actually protecting this thing. And you know, we're just going to J lightning bolt between them. Sometimes with these things, it can almost look like there's no solution in sight. But there are, like I said, there's those images online that show various ways of solving topology. So I mean, when in doubt, I always employ those classic tricks of having a single point converge at 2, or 2 points converge at 4, or something like that. I mean, those are like the rules that once you start using those, it'll help you control your topology, but it'll also help you create more poles than ever. So definitely with great power comes great responsibility. But now we have both of our flows, and we didn't have to add an extra point to the top, which means that we successfully completed that random battle. So for this one, we could either slide there, or we could slide there, which actually sounds like it's more logical. For this one, we'll just slide here. We'll slide this out, and we have to make a hard decision between sliding here, or we can just slide at this area and just create a small inner convergence break, which could be problematic, but topologically there's always a way. So for this one, let's say we really wanted to make that a quad and keep our flow. Well, let's just jump across, mitigate our triangle one more loop over in an area that's less prominent. So we have our loop almost making it all the way there. So it's almost like paving a road through the inner valleys of hell. But I guarantee you we'll make it. In fact, the light at the end of the tunnel is so near. We've almost made it around this perimeter where we can get to the next level, which is the testing process of seeing how good we did with our topological solve, where our view was partially obscured due to some of these pretty advanced angles. And here I am going back into hell once again to just force a loop along, and the knife stopped snapping partially through. So that's why you see me just going back and grabbing things and sliding it around. In fact, I'm looking at my timer here, and I'm gonna have to pick up the speed in order to avoid this being a time expended video. All right, and so we can just slide that in, and we have a pretty good look going on here. A little bit of skewing. Sometimes you must ask yourself, how much skewing do you want, will you tolerate before you begin making divergences like I am doing to basically relax the geometry. I kind of have this thing in my head that shows me how harsh geometry is being twisted, and you know, I'm just about saving the polys, you guys. So if I see some twisted polys, I'll try to get in there and relax them. And so now that we're back across this mesh again, we can really look at some of our previous solutions and maybe give them some surrounding geometry to help them solve better. So like this area, I wasn't completely pleased with its solve, and I could already tell you that sub D is going to eat this advanced corner alive. But we could basically create a subdivision here and, you know, merge this, which will give us a, let's see, okay, actually this is the correct way. So now we've kind of created this flow that's going around, and we could just merge this geometry if we wanted, but I don't know, I like some of these areas. In fact, I feel like there's a flow going through this that if we merge this, it'll terminate that. Okay, it won't, but it will forever change some things with the surfacing of this top area. So let's use some geometry to offset that. And so now we slide it in and we're getting something a little bit more optimal. In fact, you almost want to go back to the classic solution of just sending it through. I mean, some of these things, you got to just really pick your battles. In fact, if we dial back and look at this, let's change our shading back to something normal. Right click, reset to default value. There is no default value. Grr. All right. So now we're looking at our shape, and we've went through and basically meticulously created loops to basically protect the perimeters around everything that matters without disrupting the outside body too much. I mean, there's a few places I see even now I'd like to just slide and relax, but let's slap a level of sub D on this. So Control 1, if we press Alt V and we turn off overlays, this is what we're looking at as far as geometry. So this area inside, I don't know if I actually intended that to be harsh. So let's unmark this. Pretty sure I had those as arcs. And I don't even know if I want this area creased anymore. Notice how I was able to select the whole loop. And if we turn off overlays again, we can see that this has been fairly well integrated. However, you know, that's always up to you, the viewer, to decide. I always feel like I can do these things better. In fact, in practice rounds, I always feel like I get a even better result than the one that I end up showcasing to you guys. Of course, in edit mode, I never like to see, come on guys, this shading is just nuts. I can't see anything. Like going in a dark alley with this geometry. So we can start just you know, doing some final tweaks on this thing and just looking at what we have. So we have a triangle and a triangle. Let's not have that happen. In fact, how do we want to solve that? Because we just offset the triangle by putting it here, which could probably be better. We don't want a turn to have it. Something like that. And then on the other side, let's see, we got a triangle. You guys, it is just so dark on the other side of this mesh. There we go. I just have a button called flip light. It would just flip the light or something. I guess that would be a 180 flip on light. So we'll go ahead and just turn these into quads and look at what we have. We have kind of a triangle convergence happening here, and we can start redirecting the flow. And at this point, I'm really just getting over obsessive with the geometry because I've already demonstrated what I was actually going for in this demo. So let's solve this out and see what we have. But we would basically be able to solve this all the way around, basically using the same tricks to rewrite this if we wanted to have a completely different flow. But I just realized that there probably is no need for me to rewrite such a flow. But if we press Alt V and we go back into overlays and even switch over to maybe the car paint would be a little bit more alluring. In fact, I probably should have just modeled in matte cap mode. We can see that there's a few lumps in the surface, but there's always room for improvement. And the goal of this is to demonstrate how you can actually solve some of these things even by hand, just getting in there and just making some geometric choices that will just really improve you. Like I said in a previous video, I still plan to do a segment where I go over some of these previous examples, just showing how other add-ons also are capable of solving these things and automating their solutions, because they're definitely worth checking into and trying. But with that, we can go ahead and jump back to overlays, just really let it roll across and just go back into edit mode and look at some of these areas. In fact, I saw a knot in the reflection, and we go in edit mode, we can see exactly what would cause such a knot to occur. In fact, this area also had a bit of a knot, but if we were to just do a little bit of cleanup and quantify that, we can also have that area flow just a little bit better. But with these sort of things, the goal isn't, of course, absolute perfection, but definitely to get you a little bit further in your adventures. In fact, in this area, I could see that this area could also be a quad, alleviating it and just sliding this around. So spending a lot of time just staring at your shading will help you get a little bit of a better understanding. But the goal of hardops is definitely to assist you in your workflows, no matter what they be. If they're just solving for quads or doing Boolean modeling or just playing around with modifiers, we're there for you. So hopefully users have found this informative as far as how ways that you could possibly approach certain topological issues in surface control inside of hardops. And so we'll let this play out with, let's say, 500 frames.